The chatter in the dining hall vanished the moment Victoria walked past. Everyone understood the rules. She enjoyed selecting a fresh target each week. Today her gaze settled on her. The silent one. No allies, no conversations, just stillness. Too still. What was she hiding behind those calm eyes? Victoria dragged a garbage bin toward her table. The scraping noise cut through the air like a threat. She bent down, sneering. "Welcome to my domain, darling." Then crash. She overturned everything onto the woman's meal. Spoiled food and stale coffee exploded across her plate. Laughter thundered through the hall. The quiet prisoner remained motionless, solid as concrete. Then gradually she lifted her gaze. But why weren't those the eyes of someone afraid? They were calculating, as though she was recording every face in that hall and determining who would pay first. For the first time in months, Victoria took a step backward. Something deep inside warned her she had just chosen the wrong victim. And in less than 24 hours, everyone in that dining hall would discover why. Stay with me until the finale, because what this quiet prisoner does next will force you to question who the true monster really is. The arrival. The iron walls of Riverside Maximum Security facility for women had witnessed their portion of brutality, but nothing comparable to what was approaching. Most prisoners entered damaged, hopeless, or furious. Elena Carter stepped through those metal gates with something far more threatening. Absolute control. She was 34 years old with rich mahogany skin that seemed to swallow light instead of bouncing it back. Her gestures were calculated, intentional, like someone who had mapped every action before executing it. But how did she develop such precision? The processing guard examining her documents hardly glanced away from his monitor. Another narcotics offense. Another woman trapped in the machine. Nothing remarkable, nothing intimidating. But if that guard had focused, truly focused, he might have recognized something unique about Elena Carter. The manner she surveyed every edge of the chamber without rotating her head. The way her respiration stayed perfectly regulated despite existing in one of the most infamous women's institutions in the region. The way her fingers, though restrained, remained loose at her sides like she was merely anticipating the proper instant. What was she waiting for? Elena had been numerous things in her existence before those metal gates sealed behind her. A child who vanished at 15. A woman who mastered survival in environments most individuals couldn't conceive. A specialist who operated in darkness for patrons who compensated generously for difficulties to simply evaporate. But who were these clients? And what kind of problems did they need solved? Now she was inmate number 47 to 293. And the following 18 months would be devoted to maneuvering a realm that assumed it comprehended violence. Could they have been more wrong? The Queen of Riverside. The housing unit Elena was designated to was governed by terror, and everyone recognized who wielded that terror. Victoria, the Viper, Cruz stood 6 feet tall with platinum blonde hair and arms blanketed in ink that chronicled tales of every battle she'd conquered. How many battles had that been? She had been confined for 4 years on battery charges, but her actual transgression was the methodical terrorizing of anyone she considered vulnerable. Victoria's squad of devotees navigated the facility like predators, detecting weakness everywhere. They determined who received safety and who transformed into quarry. They established which prisoners consumed in tranquility and which ones starved. The officers glanced elsewhere because Victoria's aggression maintained the other captives obedient, and that simplified their responsibilities. But at what cost? When rumors circulated that new blood was arriving to Housing Unit D, Victoria's curiosity was instantly aroused. Fresh prisoners signified fresh chances to demonstrate supremacy. New countenances meant new objectives to remind everyone precisely who commanded affairs behind these barriers. What would Victoria do to the newcomer? The initial time Victoria observed Elena, she couldn't have been more satisfied with what she witnessed. A reserved woman who maintained her head lowered and her lips sealed. Someone who traveled through the passages like she was attempting to vanish into the stone itself. This wasn't merely simple prey. This was a present wrapped in orange cloth. Or was it? The first week, watching and waiting. Elena's initial week was precisely what she planned it to be. She communicated only when addressed, maintained her possessions arranged with tactical exactness, and noticed everything without seeming to observe anything whatsoever. But what exactly was she observing? She absorbed the officer shift timetables, the concealed areas in the surveillance reach, and most significantly, she absorbed Victoria's routines. Why did she need this information? Her cellmate was an anxious woman named Rachel, who had been tallying the days until her discharge for 6 months. Rachel murmured continuously about the perils of the location, about which prisoners to evade, about how to remain undetectable until your duration was finished. You appeared different from the others who passed through here, Rachel mentioned one evening after illumination ceased. Most fresh girls, they're either petrified or attempting to perform tough immediately. You just seem like you're anticipating something. What was she waiting for? Elena gazed at the surface where silhouettes from the passage lights generated geometric designs on the stone. Patience is an ability most individuals never acquire, she stated gently. But it's frequently the distinction between existing and expiring. Rachel didn't grasp what that signified, but something in Elena's tone made her sense both protected and more concerned than she had sensed in months. Should Rachel have been worried? The dining hall, where power is displayed. The prison dining hall was where rankings were founded and sustained. Victoria presided at the central table, encircled by her faithful disciples, who absorbed her vitality like leeches. Every meal was a chance to remind the community who was commanding, who merited regard, and who merited to be demolished. But how long could this power structure last? Elena entered the dining hall each dawn, transporting herself with the same tranquil dignity she preserved everywhere else. She gathered her plate without protest, acknowledged whatever slush was being distributed that day, and discovered a vacant table where she could consume in serenity while recording every dialogue, every exchange, every authority dynamic performing around her. What was she cataloging? The nourishment was precisely what she anticipated from an underfunded detention center. Liquid eggs that had been resting under heating bulbs for hours, bread that disintegrated at contact, coffee that resembled it had been steeping since the preceding day. She consumed without complaint because she had consumed far inferior in far more hazardous locations. Where had those locations been? For 2 weeks, this pattern persisted without episode. Elena merged into the backdrop noise of institution existence. Just another prisoner fulfilling her duration and avoiding difficulty. But Victoria was developing agitated. The new arrival was too silent, too serene, too comfortable. That variety of composure was hazardous because it proposed the individual possessing it had nothing to dread. In Victoria's observation, individuals who had nothing to dread typically had very solid explanations for their assurance, and that transformed them into either valuable confederates or dangers that required to be extinguished before they could establish themselves. Which one was Elena? The confrontation. The morning Victoria determined to make her action, the environment in the dining hall sensed different. Dialogues were more restrained. Prisoners glanced around nervously like creatures detecting a hunter nearby. Even the officers appeared more vigilant than typical, though none of them could have clarified why. What was everyone sensing? Elena detected the transformation the instant she penetrated the chamber. Years of instruction had educated her to interpret surroundings, to sense the subtle alterations in vitality that preceded aggression. She gathered her breakfast plate and commenced seeking a location to rest, already calculating departure paths and prospective weapons within grasp. Was she preparing for what was about to happen? That's when Victoria rose from her customary table, her enormous frame projecting a silhouette across half the dining hall. Her squad positioned alongside her instantly, grinning with expectation as they arranged to observe another exhibition of their commander authority. The chamber commenced to hush as prisoners comprehended something was about to transpire. Elena discovered a vacant table near the center of the chamber and seated herself calmly. She had no purpose of concealing in a corner or pursuing protection near the officers. If confrontation was unavoidable, she favored to encounter it on impartial territory where she had space to navigate. Why did she choose the center? Victoria approached with intentional sluggishness, relishing the concentration her movement was producing throughout the dining hall. Every gaze was on her. Every dialogue had ceased. Every prisoner was anticipating to witness what would transpire next. This was her platform, her instant to remind everyone why she was dreaded. Elena gazed down at the chaos covering her plate, then back up at Victoria with an expression that never transformed. The quietness stretched like a cable pulled too rigid. Other prisoners restrained their respiration, anticipating tears, for entreating, for the typical collapse that pursued one of Victoria's exhibitions. But what did Elena do instead? Instead, Elena extended into the accumulation of refuse and retrieved a piece of deteriorated bread. She examined it meticulously, as if investigating something captivating. Then she positioned it aside and commenced methodically separating the rubbish from what remained of her actual nourishment. Victoria's sneer wavered. This wasn't the response she was accustomed to. "Did you hear me, darling?" she demanded. I stated, "Welcome to my domain." "I heard you," Elena replied without glancing up. Her voice was stable, almost conversational. Thank you for the introduction. Why was she so calm? The response captured Victoria completely unprepared. Most prisoners either cowered or attempted to combat back instantly. This woman was performing neither. She was just sitting there cleansing garbage off her breakfast like it was the most standard thing in the realm. What was going through Victoria's mind? You think this is amusing? Victoria's voice ascended, attracting even more concentration from across the dining hall. You think you can just disregard me? Elena finally glanced up, her dark eyes encountering Victoria's pale blue ones directly. I think you're attempting very intensely to obtain a response from me. I'm just wondering why. How would Victoria react to such directness? The sincerity in her voice was disturbing. Victoria had constructed her reputation on intimidation, on making individuals afraid to even glance at her incorrectly. But this woman was glancing at her like she was resolving a mystery, not confronting down the most hazardous prisoner in Housing Unit D. One of Victoria's squad, a lean woman named Blaze, advanced forward. Victoria, you want me to instruct this one some civility? Victoria raised a hand, never severing eye contact with Elena. This was personal now. The quiet woman's calm was consuming away at her authority with every second that elapsed. No, I've got this one. Elena continued consuming what remained of her breakfast, seemingly oblivious to the developing tension, but her awareness was absolute. She could sense the hostile stares, count the footsteps of approaching prisoners, detect the officers starting to pay attention from their positions near the barriers. What was her plan? Stand up, Victoria commanded, her voice descending to a menacing rumble. Elena chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, and then slowly ascended to her feet. She was several inches shorter than Victoria, but something in her posture made the distinction seem irrelevant. Is there something specific you need from me? Why did she ask this question? The question was posed with such genuine politeness that several prisoners actually gasped. No one addressed Victoria like she was just another individual having a standard conversation. Victoria's face flushed crimson with anger and embarrassment. The woman's calm was making her appear vulnerable in front of everyone, and in a place like this, perception was everything. And right now, she was being perceived as someone who couldn't even intimidate a quiet new arrival. Yeah, there's something I need, Victoria snarled, advancing closer until she was towering over Elena. I need you to understand how things work around here. See, I run this unit. That means everything that happens here goes through me, including where someone like you gets to sit. Elena nodded slowly as if considering this information. That sounds like a lot of responsibility. It must be exhausting to manage everyone's daily activities. Was she mocking Victoria? Again, the response was so unexpected that Victoria found herself momentarily speechless. The woman wasn't mocking her, wasn't being sarcastic. She sounded genuinely sympathetic to the burden of leadership. But how could that be? The moment everything changed. You know what I think? Victoria said, her voice getting louder with each word. I think you're one of those prisoners who thinks she's superior than everyone else. One of those educated girls who got captured doing something foolish and now thinks institution regulations don't apply to her. Elena considered this assessment carefully. I think we all make choices that lead us to unexpected places. I'm just trying to serve my time quietly. Quietly, Victoria repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. Yeah, I noticed how quiet you are. Too quiet. Makes people nervous when someone's that quiet. Makes them wonder what you're hiding. What was Elena hiding? The dining hall had gone completely silent now. Even conversations at tables across the chamber had ceased as prisoners sensed something significant was building. The officers were starting to move closer, but they weren't intervening yet. They had learned that sometimes it was better to let these situations unfold rather than escalate them prematurely. Should they have intervened? Elena finished the last bite of her salvaged breakfast and set her plastic spoon down with deliberate care. I'm not hiding anything. I'm just someone who prefers to observe before acting. Observe what? Victoria demanded. Elena's eyes swept the dining hall slowly, taking in every face, every posture, every subtle alliance and enmity on display. When her gaze returned to Victoria, there was something different in it. Something that made the gang leader's stomach tighten with an emotion she hadn't felt in years. Fear. But why? Everything, Elena said simply. The single word carried weight that Victoria couldn't identify, but definitely felt. It was the tone of someone who had seen things, done things, survived things that most people couldn't imagine. It was the voice of someone who had learned that the most dangerous predators were often the ones who remained perfectly still until the moment came to strike. When would that moment come? Victoria's instincts, honed by years of prison violence, were screaming warnings she couldn't quite interpret. But she was the queen of Housing Unit D. Queens don't back down from challenges, especially not from some quiet woman who acted like she was above it all. Or should they? You know what happens to prisoners who think they're smarter than everyone else? Victoria asked, leaning down until her face was inches from Elena's. Elena met her gaze without flinching. I imagine they usually underestimate the people around them. The response was delivered with such calm certainty that Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. This woman wasn't just unafraid, she was confident in a way that suggested she had very good reasons to be. But what were those reasons? But there was no backing down now. Not with every eye in the dining hall watching. Not with her reputation on the line. Not with her squad expecting her to handle this quiet threat decisively. Victoria drew back her fist, putting every ounce of her considerable weight behind a punch designed to end the conversation permanently. It was the kind of blow that had established her dominance over dozens of prisoners, the kind that sent a clear message about what happened to anyone who dared challenge her authority. Would it work this time? The revelation. Elena saw the attack coming from the moment Victoria's shoulder tensed. 15 years of training in techniques most people had never heard of had given her an understanding of violence that went far beyond street fighting or prison brawling. The punch was powerful but clumsy, thrown with emotion instead of skill. What happened next shocked everyone. What happened next would be whispered about in every housing unit for months to come. Time seemed to slow as Elena's body moved with fluid precision that defied explanation. Her left hand came up in a gentle arc, redirecting Victoria's massive fist just enough to send it harmlessly past her head. At the same moment, her right palm struck forward with surgical accuracy, connecting with a pressure point just below Victoria's rib cage. How did she know exactly where to strike? The technique was called Midnight Strike. Applied correctly, it could disrupt breathing and drop someone twice Elena's size without causing permanent damage. Applied with full force, it could stop a heart completely. Elena held back. Victoria's eyes went wide as the air exploded from her lungs. Her massive frame folded in on itself as she dropped to her knees, gasping like a fish pulled from water. The dining hall fell into absolute silence. Even the officers froze, unable to process what they had just witnessed. What had they just seen? Blaze and the rest of Victoria's squad stood paralyzed, watching their invincible leader writhing on the concrete floor. The woman who had ruled through fear and brutality for 4 years was on her knees in front of a prisoner who looked like she should be teaching children somewhere. Elena looked down at Victoria with something that might have been pity. I asked you to let me eat in peace, she said, her voice still calm and controlled. Violence was never necessary. Why was she so merciful? The aftermath and new threats. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Officers rushed in with restraints and medical attention. But the damage to Victoria's reputation was already complete. Word spread through every housing unit within hours. The Queen of Riverside had been dethroned by a quiet woman who moved like shadow and struck like lightning. Who was this woman really? Elena was placed in solitary confinement as standard procedure. But even the officers treated her differently now. They had seen prisoners fight before, witnessed brutal beatdowns and desperate struggles, but they had never seen anything like what happened in that dining hall. That wasn't fighting. That was something else entirely. But what? The solitary cell was 8 feet by 10 feet of concrete and steel. Most prisoners emerged from isolation broken, their minds shattered by the crushing loneliness. Elena used the time to meditate, to center herself for what she knew would come next. What did she know was coming? Victoria's humiliation couldn't be allowed to stand in a place like this. Respect was currency, and Elena had just bankrupted the most powerful woman in the prison. When Elena emerged from solitary 3 days later, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Conversation stopped when she passed. Prisoners who had never spoken to her before nodded with cautious respect. Others watched from a distance, trying to understand how someone so unremarkable could possess such devastating capability. What were they seeing that others had missed? Rachel was waiting in their cell, her face a mixture of relief and terror. They're saying you killed Victoria with 1 hit. Is that true? They're saying you're some kind of secret government agent or something. Could the rumors be true? Elena sat on her narrow bunk and began folding her few belongings with the same precise movements she brought to everything. People say many things in places like this. Most of it isn't worth repeating. But what you did to Victoria, that wasn't normal. Nobody moves like that. Nobody hits like that. Elena paused in her folding, her eyes distant with memories of a different life. Training sessions that lasted until dawn. Missions that required her to become someone else entirely. A world where her skills were used to eliminate problems that governments couldn't solve through conventional means. What had those missions been like? I was trained to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, she said finally. Sometimes that training becomes useful in unexpected ways. Rachel stared at her cellmate with new understanding. What kind of training? The kind most people hope they never need. The professionals arrive. The next morning brought a different kind of tension to Housing Unit D. Victoria had been transferred to the medical wing, officially for observation, but everyone knew the real reason. She couldn't show her face in general population after what had happened. Her squad had scattered like leaves in the wind, aligning themselves with other power structures or trying to become invisible until the situation stabilized. What would fill the power vacuum? Elena walked to breakfast with the same measured steps she always used, but now those steps carried weight. Prisoners parted before her like water, their eyes following her movement with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Some looked at her with the kind of respect usually reserved for lifers who had survived decades behind bars. The dining hall felt different without Victoria's presence. Conversations were more relaxed. Laughter came easier. Several prisoners who had been living in constant fear finally seemed able to breathe. But would this peace last? Elena found an empty table and sat down to eat her breakfast in the peace she had originally requested. But peace was a luxury that rarely lasted long in places like this. As Elena ate her eggs methodically, she noticed movement at the edges of her vision. New faces. Prisoners she didn't recognize from Housing Unit D. Women with dead eyes and scarred hands who moved with the careful precision of predators sizing up potential prey. Who were these women? Word of what happened to Victoria had reached beyond Riverside's walls through the complex network of connections that linked correctional facilities across the region. Elena's name was being whispered in maximum security cells and minimum security dormitories alike. The quiet woman who had taken down the infamous Victoria Cruz with a single strike. What did this reputation attract? That kind of reputation attracted attention from people who made Victoria look like an amateur. Professional criminals who had been inside so long they had forgotten what the outside world looked like. Women who killed for money, for territory, for the simple pleasure of watching life drain from someone's eyes. 3 of them approached Elena's table as she finished her breakfast. The leader was a tall woman with graying hair and arms covered in tattoos that told stories of violence spanning decades. They called her Matriarch Reaper, and her reputation preceded her through every facility in the state correctional system. What did she want with Elena? Mind if we sit? Matriarch Reaper asked, though it wasn't really a question. Her 2 companions flanked Elena's table, blocking potential escape routes with practiced efficiency. Elena looked up from her tray, her expression unchanged. The dining hall belongs to everyone. Please join me. Matriarch Reaper smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Polite. I like that. Shows respect for your elders. She settled into the chair across from Elena, her movements deliberate and threatening. We heard about your little disagreement with Victoria. Impressive work. It was a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Misunderstanding? Matriarch Reaper laughed, a sound like gravel being poured into a cement mixer. Honey, I've been in this game for 30 years. I know the difference between a misunderstanding and a professional hit. Was Elena's cover blown? Elena set down her plastic spoon and folded her hands in her lap. Years of training had taught her to recognize genuine threats, and this woman represented danger on a level that Victoria never could have imagined. I'm not looking for trouble. I just want to serve my time quietly. See, that's where we have a problem, Matriarch Reaper replied, leaning forward across the table. Someone with your particular set of skills doesn't get to just serve time quietly. Word gets around. People start asking questions. Pretty soon you're either working for someone or you're dead. What would Elena choose? The final confrontation. The conversation was drawing attention from across the dining hall. Officers were starting to move closer, sensing tension, but not yet understanding its source. Other prisoners were clearing out nearby tables, recognizing the signs of something serious about to unfold. What was about to happen? What kind of work are you referring to? Elena asked calmly. Matriarch Reaper's smile widened. The kind that pays well and requires discretion. See, there are certain individuals in certain facilities who have become problems for certain organizations. Problems that need to be solved by someone with your obvious talents. Elena understood immediately. She was being recruited as an assassin. Her demonstration against Victoria had advertised capabilities that made her valuable to criminal organizations operating within the prison system. They wanted to use her skills to eliminate rivals, silence witnesses, or simply send messages through violence. Would she accept? "I'm not interested in that kind of work anymore," Elena said firmly. "Anymore?" Matriarch Reaper's eyes lit up with predatory interest. "So you admit you've done this kind of work before?" Elena realized her mistake immediately. In trying to deflect the offer, she had confirmed suspicions about her background. Now there was no pretending to be just another prisoner caught up in the system. "Everyone has a past. Mine is behind me." Matriarch Reaper laughed again. "Sweetheart, the past is never behind us in here. It's what defines us, what makes us useful or dangerous. And you, my dear, are extremely dangerous." One of Matriarch Reaper's companions, a muscular woman with dead eyes and scars across her knuckles, leaned in closer. "We've done our research on you, Elena Carter. Amazing how someone with your skills ends up in minimum security on a drug charge. Almost like someone wanted you here for a specific purpose." What was the real reason Elena was in prison? The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Elena felt the weight of eyes watching from every corner of the dining hall. Officers, prisoners, even kitchen staff were paying attention now, sensing that something significant was happening at the center table. "I think this conversation is over," Elena said, starting to rise from her seat. Matriarch Reaper's hand shot out and grabbed Elena's wrist with surprising strength. "Sit down, honey. We're not finished talking." The contact was a mistake. Elena's training kicked in automatically, her body responding to the threat before her mind could intervene. Her free hand moved in a swift, precise motion that struck pressure points along Matriarch Reaper's forearm. The grip loosened immediately as feeling left the older woman's fingers. Would this be enough? But Matriarch Reaper wasn't Victoria. She had survived 3 decades in maximum security facilities by being faster, smarter, and more ruthless than everyone around her. Even as her right hand went numb, her left was already moving, pulling a sharpened piece of metal from her sleeve. The weapon flashed toward Elena's throat with lethal intent. Could Elena survive this? What happened next would determine whether Elena Carter lived to see another day or whether her secret would die with her in a pool of blood on the dining hall floor. Time froze as Elena's reflexes took complete control. The sharpened metal whistled past her throat by millimeters as she twisted with fluid precision. Her counter was immediate and devastating. Her elbow drove into Matriarch Reaper's wrist with surgical accuracy, the crack of breaking bone echoing through the silent dining hall. The weapon clattered across concrete as Matriarch Reaper screamed. But Elena's training had taken full control now. 3 precise strikes to pressure points along the woman's neck sent her crashing face first onto the table, unconscious before she knew what hit her. How did Elena know exactly where to strike? The 2 companions rushed forward like predators sensing wounded prey. The first swung a padlock wrapped in cloth toward Elena's skull with bone-crushing force. Elena dropped low, swept the attacker's legs, and sent her crashing through a nearby table that splintered under the impact. The second was smarter, circling with a razor blade gleaming between her knuckles. "Speed only gets you so far," she hissed, moving like someone who understood killing. "Eventually you have to sleep." Elena remained perfectly still, calculating every angle. "You're right. But not today." The blade thrust came fast and lethal, aimed at arteries that would end everything quickly. Elena sidestepped, grabbed the wrist, and applied pressure to nerve clusters that forced the weapon to drop. Her knee lifted the attacker off her feet, and a palm strike to the neck sent her into darkness. Who had trained Elena to fight like this? The dining hall erupted into complete chaos. Prisoners screamed and ran for exits while officers rushed in with riot gear. Elena stood in the center of it all, breathing steady, hands relaxed, surrounded by 3 unconscious women who had learned too late what they were dealing with. Officer Martinez arrived with tactical teams, staring at a scene that defied everything he thought he knew about prison violence. This wasn't a brawl or a gang fight. This was something else entirely, something that belonged in movies, not in his facility. What had he just witnessed? As officers moved in with restraints, Elena offered no resistance. She had done what was necessary to survive, nothing more. But word would spread through every correctional facility in 3 states. The quiet woman who had taken down Matriarch Reaper and her crew without breaking a sweat. The legend begins. Elena Carter was placed in maximum security isolation. But her legend was just beginning in the complex hierarchy of prison power. She had just announced herself as something beyond what anyone had imagined possible. What would happen to her now? Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who never wanted to fight at all. And sometimes when you pick on the quiet one, you discover that silence isn't weakness, it's patience. And when that patience runs out, you learn why some people choose to stay quiet in the first place. Elena served the remainder of her sentence without another incident. Not because she couldn't handle whatever came next, but because after that day in the dining hall, nobody was foolish enough to test her. The quiet woman had spoken through action, and her message was clear: underestimate silence at your own peril. But the question remains: who was Elena Carter really? Why was someone with her skills serving time for a simple drug charge? And what happened after she walked out of those prison gates? Those are stories for another time. The end.